I'm Janice Fiamengo of the University of Ottawa. My theme today is the monstrous male gaze. Stories about the varieties of female violation by that monster man are getting more bizarre by the day. If you're a man, commenting on any aspect of a woman's physical appearance, speaking in the wrong tone of voice, or brushing against her body, all these now rank up there with sexual assault in the wide spectrum of indignities and outrages that women want men punished for. It really is the case, as my friend Observing Libertarian put it in a recent article, that men can't even look at a woman anymore without it potentially being felt as a sexual assault. University sexual assault policies frequently define harassment to include nearly any action known to man. The Ohio State University harassment policy includes staring, along with patting and hugging, as offensive actions that can get a man disciplined for sexual harassment. Yes, you heard that right, staring. We might ask, well, how would the woman know that he was staring and not just glancing? And how would the woman know he was staring with sexually predatory intent rather than just trying to figure out whether she was someone he'd known in high school? The woman's feelings determine all according to received wisdom, and thus there is no defense the man can make. Recently, Charlotte Proudman, a British lawyer, made news over her outrage when another lawyer, Alexander Carter Silk, told her that her photo on LinkedIn was stunning. "You definitely win the prize for the best LinkedIn picture I've ever seen," the man wrote. Gee, what an outrageously perverted thing to say. Proudman went on the offensive immediately, refusing to accept Carter Silk's apology and tweeting about his transgression in so objectifying her. She went as far as to say that his comment constituted sexual discrimination, though she herself, as it later emerged, has often commented on men's and women's looks on Facebook, sometimes in the exact same language that Carter Silk used. But of course, she's a woman, and therefore she cannot, according to the feminist definition, be a sexual predator. Note to men, by the way, don't apologize in these cases, even if you do feel sorry for what you said or done. It doesn't help you. And in fact, it makes things worse for you because it is perceived as an admission of guilt, and it encourages the feminists to continue persecuting you and, emboldened and confirmed, to go after other victims. A couple of months ago, a similar outrage over almost nothing gave me reason to reflect on feminist objections to the most trivial male actions. A headline on Canada's state-funded online news source, the CBC, caught my eye. "Women sound the alarm about pickup artist on YouTube site." The story reports on a number of women very upset over encounters they have had with a man identified as Luke Howard, who approaches women on the street in Ottawa, engages them in conversation, and then asks for their phone numbers. As the women discovered later, Howard filmed the encounters with a tiny camera positioned in his eyeglasses, and then posted them on YouTube as examples of pickup techniques men can use to meet women. The idea, he claimed, was to prove that it's not scary to talk to women. Well, he couldn't be more wrong. As it turned out, it's very scary indeed for the man, because you could end up with the police knocking on your door to inquire about your predatory and sexist behavior. I should say about this man's filming of the women without their knowledge that his actions are, in my opinion, unethical. But worthy of jail time or an inflammatory newspaper report, I don't think so. He approaches women on public thoroughfares in broad daylight. They're free to walk away at any time. Nothing he says to them is the least bit threatening. But judging from the chorus of outrage in the comments after the story from both men and women, many find him worthy of the harshest opprobrium. The question of men's advances and women's vulnerability has been with us forever. In Victorian times, a man couldn't begin speaking to a woman without a formal introduction, and there were strict rules of etiquette governing what questions he could ask her, even whether he could call her by her first name, and there were strict community punishments for violating the rules. Perhaps the Victorians understood more about male-female relations than modern feminists do. After all, if there's no difference between men and women, as the feminists tell us, then why are so many women unable to tolerate a look, a compliment, an observation, even a certain tone of voice? Yes, I know the feminist response. It's because we live in a male-dominated culture in which men use rape and the threat of rape to control women, and even men who do not rape draw a threatening power from that reality. Well, the statistics on rape do not bear out that claim, and even if rape were more prevalent than it is, there is or should be a world of difference between a sexual assault and a compliment or an admiring glance. What is new about all this fuss and worry is the near absolute credulity of the mainstream press and workplace bosses and university leaders about the sexual threat involved in seemingly non-threatening actions, and the idea that legal punishment or institutional discipline are necessary responses to female claims of emotional discomfort. How did we become a society in which a disciplinary tribunal is convened whenever a woman says she feels creepy? Part of what is going on is the mainstreaming of radical feminist theory, which was first disseminated in elite academic circles, then spread to the front lines of feminist activism, and finally found its way into police stations, law courts, and the media. Anyone who studied feminist theory at graduate school from the 1980s onward read or at least heard of film theorist Laura Mulvey on the male gaze. This was the idea that in film, the normative viewer and all the relations of looking are implicitly male. The camera eye is symbolically male, and to understand the intended meaning of the film, one has to adopt a masculine position. This theory was then extended to other art forms and eventually to culture at large, becoming a foundational idea of feminist theory, that all the major institutions of our society are organized to reflect and perpetuate a male view of the world, a world in which men look at women and act on women, and women are passive objects. The male gaze then became a shorthand for a technology of power to consolidate male dominance. Now, whether that was ever true or not, it was a satisfying and memorable way of explaining social relations. The feminist assertion became that the male gaze had to be disrupted. The power to look and to define what one sees had to be taken away from men. Feminists would never, of course, have admitted that what they wanted was to substitute a female gaze for the male gaze. No, of course not. That would be to admit wanting power. Instead, they said they wanted a multitude of ways of looking and ways of returning the gaze, a heterogeneous and polymorphous exchange of glances, both literally and metaphorically. In reality, though, having already defined the male gaze as sexually predatory, demeaning, objectifying, it was impossible to rehabilitate it. There just wasn't room in the feminist utopia for male looking at all. And we see the results of the feminist discourse very clearly in the case of our pickup artist and those who object to him. Whatever the man claims or thought he was doing doesn't matter. He can protest that he loves women all he likes. His camera eye is seen as the gaze of patriarchal power, a violation and an assault. He's a misogynist who thinks women exist in public for his consumption, one woman tweeted right on script. Predators are everywhere, commented another. A true pig, said another, and so on. The project that Laura Mulvey and her ilk began in the 1970s has succeeded perhaps far beyond what the original proponents imagined. This, then, is the feminist utopia, a world in which men actually cannot look at women except under circumstances determined by the women. If the men do look in a way the woman decides is unacceptable, they can be subject to public disgrace, disciplinary proceedings, police visits, even job loss. In the feminist utopia, women are the only ones allowed to look. In fact, they're encouraged to look at men to judge their every move. The man has to get used to his every move being assessed for its potential violation of feminist standards. Even when a woman is not looking at a man, he knows she might be looking somewhere, sometime. French theorist Michel Foucault talked about the Panopticon, a disciplinary regime in which prisoners are aware of themselves as potentially watchable at all times and thus learn to discipline themselves, to monitor their own behavior. And that's what the feminist regime wants to put in place for men, the feminist Panopticon, an awareness by men that doing pretty much anything a woman doesn't like can get them in serious, life-altering trouble. Such a situation is bound to make men feel wary, uncomfortable, uncertain, fearful, even paranoid. And that, of course, is precisely how feminists want them to feel. The feminist gaze sees the world through a grotesquely distorted lens. And the more we allow it to determine law or policies, the more repressive the impact will be.